Hey, welcome to my channel. Welcome back. How you doing on this 4th of July? Happy birthday to America. Celebrating 250 years. What if I tell you there's a creature out there that hunts dogmans across Michigan and they're winning? So let's go ahead and get into this video right here. There's plenty more videos coming throughout the day. Different topics, different things. Enjoy.
Has been my whole life an inventory of the things I dismissed. The things I told myself were nothing. Because I'm starting to think they weren't nothing. And I'm starting to think there's a lot more of them than there used to be. And I'm starting to think they aren't here for us. They're here for the dog man. I know how that sounds. Just stay with me. You probably know about the dog man. If you grew up in Michigan, you grew up with the dog man the way kids in other places grew up with the boogeyman. 7 foot tall, dog-like head, walks on 2 legs, been spotted in the northern lower peninsula since at least the 1880s. The song on the radio in 1987 that the DJ wrote as a Halloween prank, and then started getting calls about it because people had actually seen the thing. That dog man. Every state's got something. Pennsylvania's got the Green Man. West Virginia's got Mothman. Michigan's got a creature that locals have been seeing in the woods around Wexford and Manistee and Crawford counties for going on 150 years, give or take. And most people who live up there will tell you privately that they don't think it's a story. I work for the DNR, not as a ranger. I'm a wildlife biologist, contract, mostly tracking deer populations and the occasional black bear study. I've spent more time alone in those forests than is probably healthy. And I'm telling you this so you understand I'm not somebody who scares easy, and I'm not somebody who came to this from the cryptid forums. I came to this from the data. 3 years ago, in the spring of 2023, I started finding kills. Not normal kills. I know what wolf kills look like. I know what bear kills look like. I know what a coyote pack does to a fawn. These were something else. The first one I came across was in a stand of birch about 6 miles east of Cadillac. It was a deer, an adult doe, maybe 120 pounds, and what was left of her was draped over a low branch about 9 feet up. Just lay there. Like somebody had set down a coat. The body was opened along the belly with a single clean separation, and most of the soft tissue was gone, and the bones inside were stripped, and I mean stripped, the way you'd see in a museum specimen. I have never in my life seen a wild kill that looked like that. Wolves rip, bears tear. Whatever did this had extracted what it wanted with the patience of a person filleting a fish. I took photographs. I bagged what I could. I brought in a friend of mine from Michigan State, a forensics guy named Owen Bregman, who's been doing necropsies on wildlife for going on 30 years. And Owen looked at the pictures and went very quiet, and then said, "Where did you find this?" I told him. He said, "How recent?" I told him a day, 2 at most. He said, "Don't go back there alone." I asked him why. He didn't answer right away. He's not a guy who gets dramatic. He's the kind of guy who can hold up a piece of intestine and tell you what the animal ate 3 meals ago without changing his face. So when he didn't answer right away, I paid attention. He said, "I've seen something like this before. Not exactly, but close. About 15 years ago. Up by Muniscong. We never found out what did it, and the file got pulled up to Lansing, and I never heard about it again. I'd assumed it was a one-off. If you're telling me there's another one, then there's something I should probably tell you, but I want to think about how to tell you first. That's the first piece. The second piece came about 3 weeks later, when I started finding more of them. Not just deer. A coyote, dragged up onto a stump and emptied. A young black bear, which I want you to think about for a second. A young black bear, maybe 180 pounds, with its skull intact and its body completely hollowed out below the shoulders. Whatever did that to a bear, that bear didn't fight it. There were no defensive injuries, no torn earth, no broken brush. The bear just laid down and let it happen. Or it was dead before it knew anything was wrong. I called Owen. I said, "I've got more." He said, "Where are you right now?" I told him I was at my truck on a Forest Service road of 461. He said, drive home now, and call me from your house." I did. I sat at my kitchen table that night, and Owen told me the rest of what he knew. And that's where this story really starts. Owen's old, late 60s. He grew up in the Upper Peninsula, in a little town outside Marquette, and his father had been a county coroner before him, and his grandfather had been a sheriff's deputy in Iron County back in the 1930s. So, when Owen tells me about the dog man, he's not telling me about the song or the YouTube videos. He's telling me about something his grandfather wrote in a personal log 1936 after a homesteader named Soren Lindqvist found his cattle slaughtered out near the Bull River. The deputy, Owen's grandfather, went out to look at it, and what he wrote in his log, which Owen still has in a footlocker in his basement, was that the cattle had been killed by something that walked on two legs, and that Lindqvist had seen it, and that Lindqvist described it as a tall man with the head of a dog. This was 1936. This was in the UP, not the Lower Peninsula, and the deputy wrote in his own hand that he had seen tracks at the edge of the field that he could not match to any animal known to him, and that the tracks went up into the rock and disappeared, and that he was not going to write a formal report because he did not want to lose his job over a thing he could not explain. Owen's family has been keeping records on these creatures for 90 years, not publicly, privately, the way some families keep records of land disputes or family illnesses. There's a footlocker in his basement with reports going back to his grandfather and continuing through his father, who, as a county coroner, saw a number of bodies over the years that did not get into the official cause of death column, and now Owen, who has carried it on, mostly out of obligation, mostly because nobody else will. I have been down to that basement exactly twice. Owen does not invite people down there. The footlocker sits under a workbench, between a box of his late wife's holiday decorations and a crate of canning jars, and the lock on it is original from his grandfather's days. A brass push-button thing, with the keyhole worn smooth from decades of use. The first time he opened it for me, in the spring of 2023, he pulled out a stack of journals and laid them on the workbench in chronological order. And the smell that came up out of the trunk was old paper and pipe smoke. It's something that I've come to recognize as the smell of houses that haven't been empty for very long. The way a place smells when it's been continuously inhabited for almost a century. The journals weren't fragile. They'd been kept in a sealed footlocker by men who took care of things. The deputy's hand was small and slanted to the right. The coroner's hand was bigger, blockier, and his pages were neater, the way you'd expect from a man who wrote out cause of death certificates for a living. Owen's own journals, the most recent ones, were college-ruled spiral notebooks with his name and the year written on the cover in marker. And they looked exactly like the kind of thing a man keeps because his father kept them and his grandfather kept them. And breaking the chain wasn't an option that had ever occurred to him. He told me that night at my kitchen table that the dog man is real and has been real for at least 150 documented years and is the closest thing we have on this continent to what other cultures would call a folk creature with a stable population, reproducing, territorial, largely avoiding humans, predating on deer and small game and occasionally livestock, long-lived by his estimate, although nobody really knows, and mostly leaving us alone. He said the dog man is a predator, but it's our predator, by which he meant it belongs to this place, the way wolves belong here and the way the lake belongs here. It's part of the system. He said, what's killing things in your photographs is not the dog man. I asked him how he knew. He said, because the dog man doesn't do that to a body. The dog man eats. Whatever did this is not eating, it's harvesting. I asked him what the difference was. He said, an animal that eats leaves you something an animal would leave. Whatever's working through that forest right now is taking what it needs and leaving the rest in a way that an animal would not. A wolf will gorge until it can't move and then sleep on the kill for a day. A bear will cache. A coyote will scatter. None of them strip a carcass clean and drape it over a branch. That's not feeding, that's processing. He said the word processing the way you'd say it about a slaughterhouse. And when he said it, I thought about the doe over the birch branch, and I thought about the bear with its skull intact and its body hollow, and I thought about the way my stomach had felt when I'd looked at them, like my body had known something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I asked Owen if his grandfather's records had anything about other things in the woods, things besides the dog man. He went quiet for a long time. He poured himself another drink. He said, there's some entries that don't make sense. There's a couple of incidents in the 40s where livestock got killed in ways my father at the time attributed to the dog man, but he wrote question marks in the margin. There's a body my father did an autopsy on in 1971 that he listed officially as bear attack, but in his personal notes, he wrote that he didn't think it was a bear and he didn't think it was a dog man either. He wrote that the wounds were, quote, not consistent with any predator I have examined in 20 years of practice, end quote. And then he never wrote about it again. So, yes, there's something else. There's been something else for a long time. But it was rare. It would show up once a decade, maybe, and then go away. What you're showing me is happening every couple of weeks. He looked at me across the table. He said, "Something has changed. That conversation was in April of 2023. I want to walk you through what's happened since, because the pattern is the part that scares me, not the individual kills."
It's natural for things to slow down in the bedroom, but why settle for natural? This has us jumping each other like we're 20 again. Rugiet Ready is a discreet ED med that does 5 things most others can't. 1, it's more reliable than pills or chewables. Dissolves under your tongue, bypassing digestion for more consistent effects. 2, it can feel more satisfying for both of you. 3, it's fast. So fast. Effects hit in 15 minutes on average. 4, it can last up to 36 hours. Yeah, 36 hours, so be prepared for when your coworkers ask what you did all weekend. Gardening. 5, it's made him so much more confident he knows he can perform, and he shows it. And honestly, it's freaking hot. Go to Rugiet.com and get started today.
The pattern. I started keeping a map, old paper map of the northern lower peninsula, pinned to the wall of my office, and I started putting colored pins in it. Red for what Owen and I had started calling the harvest kills, the stripped carcasses, the ones that didn't fit. Blue for
That's
confirmed
bullshit there.
dogman activity, which is something Owen's family has been tracking for decades and has a pretty good sense of. The territories, the typical ranges, the places you'd expect to find sign. By the end of 2023, I had 11 red pins, mostly clustered in a rough oval running from Cadillac, up through Kalkaska, and over toward Grayling. And I had 19 blue pins, scattered through the same general region, but not exactly overlapping with the red. The blue pins were drifting, pulling away, concentrating to the east and northeast, up toward the Pigeon River country. I want to be careful here because I am about to describe behavior in an animal whose existence isn't in any biology textbook, and I'm aware of how that sounds. But the data was the data. The dogman, whatever the dogman is, was being pushed. The territories Owen's family had documented for almost a century were being abandoned. Sign was disappearing from places it had been reliable for 40 years, and the harvest kills were filling in the gaps. There was a place outside Messick that Owen called the Hollow. His father had documented dogman sign there in 1962, 1978, and again in 2004, on 3 separate trips, spaced 16 and 26 years apart. A particular kind of scratching on a particular kind of beech tree, about 8 feet up, 4 parallel grooves, always on the south face of the trunk. Owen had taken me there in October of 2023 to show me what the sign looked like when you knew what you were looking at. The trees still had the old grooves in them, scarred over and weathered, the bark grown thick around them, like rings around a wound. There was no fresh sign. None. Owen stood there with his hand flat against the trunk of one of those beeches and didn't say anything for a long time, and then he said, "My father stood in this exact spot in 1978 and watched one of them scratch this tree. He said it the way a man tells you about something his father saw at war. The information had been passed down. It was a real thing in a real place, and now the place was empty. We went back in November, and the place was still empty, and we went back in February, and it was still empty. And that was when the territory abandonment really hit me, because the Hollow had been continuously occupied by dogmen, by Owen's family's records, for at least 61 years, and now nobody lived there. In the spring of 2024, I found my first dogman. I'd seen them before, twice, once at 17 on the porch, although for years I told myself that was a deer. Once when I was 26 on a tracking job up by Houghton Lake, a glimpse through the trees, gone before I could even get my heart back in my chest. But this one, I found dead. It was about 2 miles off any trail, in a ravine that had a creek running through it, and I had been pulling deer trail cameras for the spring rotation. And one of the cameras had stopped sending data 3 weeks earlier, and I had hiked in to figure out why. The camera was lying on the ground at the base of the tree it had been mounted on, and the strap was torn, and I picked it up and put it in my pack, and that's when I smelled it. You learn the smell of dead things in this job. There are different kinds of dead. There's the wet rot of something that's been in water. There's the dry, mummified smell of something that died fast in dry weather. There's the heavy, sweet, almost floral smell of a bloat. This was none of those. This was something I had no category for. It was sharp, almost metallic, and it had an undertone that I want to describe as electrical, like the smell of a transformer that's burned out. I'd never smelled an animal that smelled like that. I followed it about 60 yards down into the ravine, and I found it. I'm going to call it because that's what I felt looking at it. I don't know how else to put that. He was lying on his side in a patch of moss along the creek. He was about 7.5 feet long, and he was built the way Owen's grandfather had described, the way the songs had described, the way every witness for 150 years had been describing them. Long limbs, heavy shoulders, a head that was unmistakably canine in shape, but proportioned wrong, the muzzle longer than a wolf's, the cranium larger. His fur was dark, almost black on the back, lightening to a kind of dusty brown along the belly. His paws, and I'm going to say paws because hands isn't right, feet isn't right. His paws were shaped halfway between a wolf's and a primate's, with a thumb that wasn't quite a thumb. He had been opened along the belly, the same single clean separation I'd been seeing on the deer for a year. Most of the soft tissue was gone, the ribs were intact, the skull was intact, the eyes were closed. I stood there for a long time. I want you to understand that. I stood there in that ravine in the middle of nowhere, looking at a creature that wasn't supposed to exist, that I'd been hearing about my whole life, that I'd glimpsed twice and convinced myself I hadn't. And what I felt was not excitement. I had been a wildlife biologist for 16 years at that point, and the moment I realized what I was looking at was not a triumph. It was grief, because somebody had killed him, and he had been killed the same way the deer had been killed. And I understood, looking down at him in the moss, that whatever I'd been tracking for a year, whatever had been pushing the dogman population east, was not fighting them. It was farming them. I knelt down next to him. I didn't touch him at first. I just looked. The fur on his shoulder had a streak of gray running through it, a saddle of lighter color that ran from the base of his neck back to the spot where the ribs started. And I remember thinking he was old, older than the others I'd seen at distance, old enough that maybe he'd been around when Owen's father was still keeping notes. The pads of his rear feet had calluses on them. You only get from walking on hard ground for a long time. Years of walking, decades maybe. He had lived a whole life in those woods, a life nobody had counted, doing whatever it is the dog man do when nobody is watching. And somewhere in the end of that life, something had come for him and opened him up like a feed sack and emptied him. How much would an 800 his teeth then? His mouth was slightly open. The teeth were canine, but bigger, the canines themselves about 1.5 inches long, yellowed at the base, sharp at the tips, but worn. The way an old wolf's teeth are worn. He had used those teeth on a lot of things over a lot of years. A working set. The teeth of a creature that had been a predator its whole life. I called Owen from the trailhead. My hands were shaking so bad, I dropped the phone twice. He drove up the next morning. We hiked back in together. He stood over the body for almost 20 minutes without saying anything, and then he knelt down, and he put one hand on the dogman's shoulder, very gently. The way you touch a friend at a funeral, and he said, "I'm sorry." He said it out loud. To the body. "I'm sorry. We took samples. We took photographs. We did what we could with what we had, which wasn't a lab and wasn't a forensics team, just two men in a ravine with a camera and some plastic bags. And then, because we agreed we couldn't leave him there, we buried him. It took us 4 hours with the small folding shovels we had between us. We didn't mark the grave. We agreed not to. While we were digging, Owen told me about a hunter he'd known when he was a kid, a man named Per Callio, who had lived in a cabin outside Greenland Township up in the UP and had trapped marten and fisher in those woods his whole life. Per had told Owen, when Owen was maybe 12, about a creature he had seen once at dawn, drinking from a stream, and how it had stood up when it noticed him, and walked off through the trees on 2 legs without looking back, and how Per had not gone trapping for the next 2 weeks because he had felt watched in the woods and didn't want to push it. Owen said he'd thought, as a kid, that Per was telling him a ghost story. He said it was only after his father died, when he started reading the old journal straight through for the first time, that he understood Per had been telling him the truth. Per had passed in the late 1990s. Owen said he wished he'd been able to talk to him as an adult. He said he wished he could ask him what the dog man had looked like up close, whether the eyes had been the way they were on the body of the ravine, closed, almost peaceful, like an old man who had finally lain down. On the hike out, Owen said something I've thought about every day since. He said, "My grandfather wrote in 1936 that the dog man was the apex of these woods, that nothing hunted it, that it was the thing that hunted everything else. And for 90 years, every record we've kept has confirmed that. Until now," he said, "whatever's doing this isn't from here." I asked him what he meant by that. From where then? He said, "I don't know, but the dog man is from here. The wolves are from here. The bears are from here. Every predator in this ecosystem fits in this ecosystem. They evolve together. They have rules. Whatever's doing this doesn't have rules I recognize, and the dog man doesn't have a defense for it. And that tells me it's something the dog man never had to develop a defense for, which means it's new, or it's been here a long time and something woke it up. Either way, it's outside the system. I'm going to pause here for now, because what I want to talk about next is the summer of 2024 and what we saw in the Pigeon River country. And I need to take a minute before I get into that part. So the dogman population had been pulling east. By the summer of 2024, they were concentrated in a roughly 70 square mile area in the Pigeon River State Forest, which, if you don't know, is one of the largest contiguous wild areas in the Lower Peninsula. It's where the elk live. It's old growth in places. It's the closest thing Michigan has to genuine wilderness south of the bridge. And what Owen and I were seeing on the trail cameras and in the sign we were pulling was that the dogman were grouping up in a way they don't normally group. Owen's grandfather's records and his father's records and his own records all consistently describe the dogman as solitary or in pairs, occasionally a female with a juvenile. They are not pack animals. They've never been pack animals as far as anyone has ever documented. But by July of 2024, we were finding evidence of groups, 6, 7, 8 individuals moving together. We pulled one trail camera that had captured what looked like 9 of them passing through a clearing in the early dawn, single file, the largest in front and the largest in back, the smaller ones in the middle, a formation, the kind of thing animals do when they're protecting young. Owen sat with that footage for a long time. We watched it together at his kitchen table on his laptop, the same clip, over and over, frame by frame. 9 animals in a field at dawn, the light coming up gray-blue behind them, the grass wet, the largest of them carrying his head low, the way a wolf does when it's tired, but won't show it. The one at the back kept turning every few steps.
Alright, so I got my heat.
Not at the camera. The camera was off to one side, hidden in a tree. He was looking back along the direction they'd come from, watching their back trail. The way you do when you know something is following you. Owen said, "That's the alpha at the back." I said, "I thought the alpha was at the front." He said, "In a normal wolf pack, sure, but that's not what's happening here. Look at how the smaller ones are positioned. The ones in the middle are all younger. The biggest one is at the back because the threat is coming from behind. The biggest one is the rear guard. He's there to die first if it catches up to them." I watched the clip again with that in mind. The way the rear animal kept looking back, the way he didn't hurry the others, the way his head stayed low and his shoulders stayed loose, because if he tensed up, the others would tense up, and they couldn't afford to tense up, because tense animals make mistakes. He was holding it together for them. That clip is still on Owen's laptop. I think about it more often than I'd like to admit. They were also avoiding us in a way they hadn't before. Owen said his family's notes documented occasional sightings, the way I'd had at 17, the way I'd had at 26. The dogman would let itself be seen sometimes, especially at the edges of its range, especially if it wanted you to know it was there. By that summer, they were not letting themselves be seen. We had 3 months of trail cameras that caught them, but we never once laid eyes on one in person, and we were spending 40 hours a week in those woods. They were hiding. From us, sure, but not just from us, because the harvest kills kept happening, and now they were happening in the Pigeon River country, where the dogman had retreated to, which meant whatever was killing them had followed. I want to describe one of the kills from that summer because it's important. It was the only one we found where the body wasn't fully harvested. I think we got there in the middle of it. I think we interrupted whatever was doing this. It was August. Hot. We had a stretch of 90-degree weather that week, and the air in those woods was so thick you could almost chew it. Owen and I were checking a camera array we'd set up near a creek crossing that the dogman had been using regularly. We were about a half mile from the truck, and we came up over a small rise, and there was a dog man lying in a patch of ferns about 20 yards away, on his side, and he was still alive. His eyes were open. He was breathing, slow, shallow breaths. His belly had been opened, the same single clean separation I had seen 100 times, but the harvesting hadn't started yet. It was just opened, like something had made the first cut and then been interrupted. His eyes moved when we came over the rise. They tracked us. He saw us. Owen put his hand on my arm and stopped me. He said very quietly, "Don't move." I didn't move. We stood there for, I don't know how long, maybe a full minute. The dog man watched us. His chest rose and fell. There was no sound in the woods. None at all. I want you to understand what I mean by that. There were no insects, no birds. The creek about 30 yards away was running, and I could hear the water, but there was no other sound. The forest had gone completely silent, and I had been in those woods enough by then to know that when a forest goes silent like that, something is in it that doesn't belong. The dog man's eyes shifted. He was looking past us now, up and to the right, behind us. I felt it then. The thing I had felt a couple of times before in those woods over the past year and dismissed. A sense of being watched. Except this wasn't a sense, this was a physical pressure, the way a cold front feels when it moves in. That drop in the air, that change in the way your skin reads the world. Something was behind us and above us, in the trees maybe. I don't know what was up there. I never turned around. Owen never turned around. I want to try to describe the pressure because it's the thing I've struggled hardest to put into words. It wasn't fear, exactly. Fear has a shape. Fear has a thing it's pointed at. This was more like the feeling you get when you're a kid and you wake up in the middle of the night and you can hear that the house isn't quite right, that something has moved in the dark while you were asleep, and your whole body knows it before your brain has a single specific reason to know. The skin on the back of my neck went cold, not chills, cold, as if a draft was running across it. The hair on my forearm stood up so hard it almost stung, my jaw locked, my back teeth pressed together without me telling them to. I could feel my own pulse in my fingertips, slow and very heavy. The way it gets when your body is trying to be ready for something it doesn't know how to be ready for. And there was a smell, the same smell as the body in the ravine. Sharp, metallic, with that electrical undertone, like burned wiring, faint, drifting, coming from above us and slightly behind. The way the dog man's eyes had said it would be. The dog man closed his eyes. He opened them. He looked at me directly, deliberately. And I want you to know, I am not making this up, and I am not embellishing this. I have spent 2 years trying to figure out how to describe it. The look in his eyes was the look of an animal that knows it is about to die and has accepted it. There was no fear. There was an exhaustion so profound it was almost peaceful. And underneath the exhaustion there was something I can only describe as recognition. He saw me. He saw a person. And he was telling me, with the only thing he had left to tell me with, that he understood I was a person, and that he was sorry I had to see this. Then he closed his eyes for the last time. The pressure behind us got worse. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up so hard it hurt. Owen's hand tightened on my arm. He said very quietly, almost mouthing it, "Walk away. Back the way we came. Don't run. Don't turn around." Walked, slow even steps, back over the rise, down the slope, through about 300 yards of forest that felt longer than any 300 yards I have ever walked. The pressure stayed with us about half that distance, and then it was gone, suddenly, completely, the way a draft stops when the door closes. The insects came back. A bird called somewhere off to our left. The forest was a forest again. We got to the truck. We didn't talk on the drive out. We didn't talk for the first 20 minutes of the drive home. Then Owen said, "I want to look at the camera footage from yesterday, the array we just left. I want to see what came through there last night." We pulled the cards that evening. The cameras had been on for 36 hours. The first 28 hours were normal. Deer, a raccoon, 3 different coyotes at different times. Then, at 3:11 in the morning, the cameras started going dark, one at a time, in sequence, each one going to black about 40 seconds after the last. Not malfunctioning. The infrared was still working. They just stopped showing anything, as if something had passed in front of each lens close enough to fill the entire frame. The fourth camera, the one furthest from where we found the dog man, caught a glimpse before it went dark, about a third of a second of footage. Owen and I have watched it probably 200 times. It's tall. That's the first thing. Whatever it is, it's tall enough that the camera, mounted at about 5 feet off the ground, only catches it from roughly the waist down. So, we're looking at legs. Long legs. Too long. Bending in a way that legs aren't supposed to bend, with what looks like an extra joint between the knee and the ankle. The skin, if you can call it skin, is a kind of mottled gray that the infrared makes look pale. There's no fur. It's smooth. And there's something hanging from one of what I'll call the hands. Although I don't want to describe the hands because I don't entirely understand what I'm looking at when I look at the hands. There's something hanging from the hand, and the something is shaped roughly like the partial body of a deer. Except the deer looks wrong, it looks compressed. It looks like it has been folded in some way, that an animal body should not fold. That's the third of a second of footage. Then the camera goes dark. We sent the clip to a friend of Owen's in Michigan Tech, a guy who teaches digital forensics and who Owen trusts to keep his mouth shut. He came back to us a week later. He said the clip wasn't manipulated. He said the legs in the footage cast a shadow, consistent with a single light source, the moon, and the angle of the shadow matched the moon's position at 3:11 a.m. on that date. He said whatever was in front of the camera was physically there. He said he didn't have an explanation. He said he was glad we hadn't put his name on anything and asked us politely not to send him anymore. The next morning, we hiked back in. The dog man's body was gone. The patch of ferns was undisturbed. There was no blood, no drag marks, no sign that anything had been there at all. Just the small impression in the ferns where the body had been, which had already started to spring back. Owen said, it came back for him. I said, why didn't it take us? Owen looked at me for a long time. He said, I think it was deciding. I think it was looking at us and deciding. And I think the dog man, in the last seconds he was conscious, did something that made it decide not to. I have thought about that a lot. I have thought about the look that dog man gave me. And I have thought about the way the pressure behind us lifted suddenly. And I have wondered if Owen is right. I'll never know. But I think about it. We changed how we worked after that. We stopped going out without each other. We stopped going out at dusk or dawn. We stopped going more than a mile from the truck. Owen said his grandfather had a phrase he used in his journal when he was writing about the UP in the 30s, about a kind of caution you developed when you spent enough time in country that wasn't yours. He called it walking small. Don't be the loud thing. Don't be the obvious thing. Don't be the thing that draws notice. We started walking small. Through the fall of 2024 and the winter that followed, we kept tracking. The harvest kills slowed in the winter, which makes sense if whatever was doing it had any kind of seasonal pattern, although Owen pointed out that we don't know enough about it to assume it works on the same calendar as the things we understand. They didn't stop entirely. We found 2 in December and 1 in February. The dogman population, as best we could estimate, was down significantly from the year before. Owen's records had estimated a stable lower peninsula population of maybe 40 to 60 individuals across the whole region for as long as his family had been counted. By the start of 2025, we thought there might be 12, maybe fewer. The February kill was the one that I have the hardest.
Basically, there's something out there killing dogmen, even though dogmen are top predator of this country. People don't want to believe it. But there are things in the world that can kill a dogman. And everything. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. Good night.